Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. The Americans came to Afghanistan, stayed for 20 years, dropped what they call the mother of all bombs on the Afghans, and now they're abandoning the country, asking its neighbors to clear the mess they've created. This includes ending the war and the violence. But with the Taliban getting stronger and showing no interest in dialogue now, the situation has become a new security nightmare for India and the world. Because Washington has left the door wide open for China and Pakistan to step in. And both these countries are seizing the moment. Beijing is trying to position itself as the Afghan mediator. It has deployed its state mouthpiece to build momentum for this. And Islamabad is doing what it does best, sending terrorists to join the Taliban's war. On Gravitas tonight, we'll bring you details of this growing challenge. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
India's drug regulator is expected to consider the emergency use approval for Zydus Cadilla's COVID-19 vaccine for children above 12 years. The data will be examined this week. The vaccine has been tested on adults along with children above 12. If approved, vaccine supply is expected to begin by August-September. Amid the escalating crisis in Afghanistan, as foreign forces withdraw, the Chinese foreign minister is expected to visit Afghanistan's neighbors between July 12th and 16th. Wang Yi will visit Turkmenistan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. China's Global Times says the country will serve as a mediator for regional security. Reports say that in a world first, the Israel Defense Force used an artificial intelligence-guided drone swarm for attacks on Hamas militants in May. The news comes after Israel recently announced the successful testing of a new laser defense system that can shoot down enemy missiles by burning a hole in them. Authorities in Haiti say they have arrested a doctor believed to be a key suspect in President Jovenel Moïse's assassination. Christian Emmanuel Zanon, a Haitian national, is suspected of hiring mercenaries to oust Moïse and then installing himself as president. China has issued a draft 3-year action plan to develop the country's cybersecurity industry, pegging the sector to be worth more than $38.6 billion by 2023. The move comes after China ordered a probe of ride-hailing giant Didi for allegedly violating data privacy. A court in Jordan sentences 2 former officials to 15 years in jail over charges of destabilizing the monarchy. Bassem Awadallah, once a top aide to King Abdullah II, and Sharif Hassan bin Zayed have been found guilty of sedition and incitement charges. In what is being hailed as a historic decision, Israel's top court rules that limitations denying same-sex couples the right to have children through surrogacy were illegal. The ruling says these limitations would be nullified within 6 months. A cloudburst triggered flash floods in the popular Indian tourist city of Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh, forcing the airport and roads to shut down. Officials have issued an advisory asking people to put their travel plans on hold. This as scores of tourists have been heading to the city and nearby hills to beat the heat. Prime Minister Boris Johnson and England football team manager Gareth Southgate have strongly condemned the racial abuse aimed at Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka on social media. The trio were targeted after missing their penalty kicks as Italy beat England in a shootout to be crowned European champions on Sunday. The London Metropolitan Police is investigating the abuse and say it will not be tolerated. The Milwaukee Bucks have roared back into contention in the NBA Finals with a 120-100 point thumping of the Phoenix Suns in Game 3. Giannis Antetokounmpo starred with 41 points and 13 rebounds as the Bucks ran riot in the second and third quarters. Chris Paul had 19 points, but Suns All-Star Devin Booker struggled as their lead was cut down to 2-1 in the best-of-7 series.
America has symbolically ended its war in Afghanistan today. Its top general has stepped down from command, but there's no ending the war and the violence. Over the weekend, India decided to call back 50 officials from Kandahar. The Taliban is at the doorstep of the city. The Indian consulate is still operating, but the security situation is worsening, and it makes all the sense in the world to bring officials to safety. In the last 2 months, the Taliban has doubled the number of districts under its control. Look at the map on your screen. In mid-April, the Taliban was in control of 77 districts. By the end of May, that's after the US troops began to leave, almost 100 districts had fallen to the Taliban. Now we're in the month of July. The Taliban now effectively controls more than 200 districts. And this trend is expected to continue. The Taliban have recruited new allies from Pakistan and China. Terrorists from Pakistan are fighting alongside them in Afghanistan. And mediators from China want to champion their cause. The Taliban has promised security to Chinese assets. The trio, the Taliban, Pakistan and China, coming together spells bad news for India. Tonight we'll tell you how America's mistakes are giving birth to a new security nightmare for India and the world. We begin with the latest. India has temporarily withdrawn its diplomatic staff from Kandahar, but the consulate has not been closed. There are 15 to 20 local officials who are still working at this mission. Earlier this year, India had called back its diplomats from its consulates in Herat and Jalalabad. So Kandahar is the third mission to witness an evacuation. Earlier today, we spoke to Bahir Ahmadi, the spokesperson for the Kandahar governor. He told us why the evacuation was necessary.
I can tell you, assure that the place where the Indian consulate is located is safe and sound, and there is no problem. But yeah, since 4 and 5 days, the situation was a little bit critical, and the fighting was near, at least 3 kilometers far away from the Indian consulate. Due to some circumstances, the Indian consulate have decided that they should take out their diplomats to the Kabul.
The fighting was happening just 3 kilometers away from the Indian mission. 3 kilometers, that's how close the Taliban were to the consulate. On Friday, terrorists entered the main city. And this is significant also because of Kandahar's history. In the 1990s, Kandahar served as the headquarters of the Taliban. At the time, it had introduced a strict form of Sharia law on the locals here. Formal education for children was banned, and regressive restrictions were imposed on women. Of course, India remembers Kandahar for different but equally painful reasons. In December 1999, the hijacked Indian Airlines Flight 814 was taken to Kandahar. The plane with the passengers was held hostage at the Kandahar International Airport. It was released only after India handed over 3 Pakistani terrorists from its custody. So a recapture of Kandahar could mean the return of the same oppressive and terrorist regime. Afghan special forces are trying to push them back. They've been moving from one area to another to clear the Taliban terrorists out. Meanwhile, India is trying to reshape its strategy. In view of this changing situation, there are efforts to back-channel with the Taliban. India hasn't confirmed this, but there's enough to suggest that India wants a diplomatic solution to the Taliban problem. Reports say that at the United Nations, India backed America's call to exempt 14 Taliban leaders from a travel ban. This happened last month. India chairs the Taliban Sanctions Committee of the United Nations. This committee follows and acts against Taliban attacks in Afghanistan. Now, as the head of this committee, India agreed to a 3-month-long exemption for Taliban leaders. And this exemption allowed the likes of Mullah Baradar to travel and participate in peace talks. In hindsight, though, the peace dialogue was an exercise in futility. There is no peace. The Taliban wants power by force. It has dumped diplomacy to launch more attacks. Today, terrorists from the Taliban surrounded Ghazni. It's a strategically located city. Ghazni, it connects Kabul to Kandahar. Now, reports say the Taliban has been taking over homes of civilians. Meanwhile, the Americans continue to leave the mess behind. Today, the top U.S. general in Afghanistan stepped down. This is General Austin Miller. He will leave as the longest-serving senior officer of America in Afghanistan. By now, virtually all American soldiers, contractors and equipment have left. America's European allies have also almost completed their exit. And as they leave, they're discussing the situation on the ground. In Brussels today, European foreign ministers are meeting to discuss Afghanistan. Also tracking these developments is China. You see, the US has left the door wide open for China to step in. And Beijing is seizing the moment. On Sunday, the Global Times ran this story. It's about Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to 3 neighbors of Afghanistan. Which are these neighbors? Turkmenistan, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Now, China is trying to position itself as the Afghan mediator. And Beijing has deployed its state mouthpiece to build momentum for this. This piece quotes an expert, who called China a guarantor of security in the region. That's how they're pitching themselves, the guarantors of security. China wants to play a more hands-on role in Afghanistan. Until now, it has been operating through Pakistan, which is a country that still continues to be a sanctuary for terrorists of Taliban. So I'll end where I began. As India tries to secure its interests, the going is only getting tougher for it. This is a major security challenge that everyone could have done without. In 1947, Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah had famously stated that his country's most valuable asset was its location. Jinnah said, and I quote, "Pakistan is the pivot of the world, as we are placed on the frontier on which the future position of the world revolves." This was 74 years back. Today, 74 years later, not very much has changed in terms of how Pakistan sees itself. As America abandons Afghanistan after 20 years and puts the onus of peace on the war-torn country's neighbors, Islamabad is looking to use this leverage over Taliban, to redraw the existing geopolitical dynamics. This includes limiting India's sphere of influence and winning some concessions from the Americans for handling the mess after they leave. But it doesn't take a genius to know what Islamabad's real intentions are. Officially, the Pakistani establishment says it's not in favor of Talibanization, that it won't let the Taliban be the dominant force in Afghanistan. But unofficially, the Pakistani state is letting hundreds of terrorists into Afghanistan. And if we needed any more proof of Pakistan's love affair with the Taliban, a funeral procession in Peshawar on Saturday night settled all doubts.
It started as a funeral procession. It ended up as a rally in support of the Taliban. In the midnight of 9th and 10th July, hundreds gathered in the city of Peshawar to attend the funeral of a prominent cleric. The mourners didn't come alone. They came armed with flags of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. This was an Islamic state which the Taliban had established after clinching power in 1996. Not only were the controversial flags of this emirate brandished, there were also slogans expressing clear support to the Taliban. We won't provide these slogans a platform. But what we can tell you is that the pro-Taliban sentiment is getting stronger in Pakistan. A few weeks back, there were reports of a surge in Taliban fundraising across Pakistan. Now, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has said that the Taliban's attire may be simple, but they're very intelligent and competent people. So it should come as no surprise that hundreds of Pakistani terrorists are being allowed to cross into Afghanistan to help their so-called competent associates. According to Afghan and Indian security agencies, terrorists from Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, Lashkar-e-Jangvi, Jamaat-ul-Arhar, Lashkar-e-Islam and Al-Badr are now fighting alongside the Taliban in sizable numbers. These terrorists have been spotted in Ghazni, Khost, Logar, Paktia, Paktika, Kunar, Nangarhar, Helmand, Kandahar. Most of these provinces share borders with Pakistan. The number of Pakistani terrorists here is estimated to be 7,200. They have been recently recruited as advisors, commanders, administrators, fighters and suicide bombers in several areas. They are entering Afghanistan with the help of the Pakistan military. Their presence and actions are in clear violation of the 2020 peace deal signed between the Taliban and the United States. All of this begs the question, what exactly is Pakistan's game plan in Afghanistan? It's safe to say that it's anything but constructive. Islamabad was the reason that America lost the war. And it will be the reason that the Taliban comes back to power. Because an unstable Afghanistan suits Pakistan. First of all, it allows Pakistan to expand its sphere of influence and limit India's engagements. Secondly, cultivating the Taliban also wins the support from Islamist radicals back home in the form of votes. And lastly, it helps Pakistan in casting a shadow of terror on Jammu and Kashmir. But reigning in the Taliban has never been easy, not even for the ISI and the Pak army. So Islamabad must make its choices wisely because fueling instability in Afghanistan has always come back to haunt Pakistan. In the form of sanctions, resolutions and terror attacks on Pakistan's own citizens. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Have you heard the term white man's burden? It was the supposed duty of the whites to bring culture and civilization to the non-whites. That's the white man's burden. That's how they explained colonialism. They were educating and civilizing the heathens. The British were the masters of this. British apologists still believe that India would not have had an education system, a civil service, a sense of social propriety and etiquette had the British not lorded over it. But over the weekend, these champions of civilization showed their barbaric side. They ran riot, hurled racial abuse, indulged in violence, and contributed to what's being called a Superspreader event. Our story begins with the Euro Cup final. England lost twice, once on the football pitch and again outside the stadium. Their fans turned into booze-fueled savages. They attacked Italian supporters and racially abused their own players. Why? Because of hurt pride. Because their team lost and they couldn't accept it. English fans, by the way, have always been this way. They're not disappointed when England loses. They're enraged. It is the byproduct of centuries of entitlement. Not surprising for a country that calls itself Great Britain. Doesn't exactly scream humility or graciousness. The true face of Britain was laid bare at Wembley. Things got rowdy even before kickoff. Just look at these so-called fans. They did not get tickets to the final. But instead of staying home and watching the match on TV, they decided to invade the stadium. They broke through barriers and jumped fences. It was less of a celebration, more of a riot, and it set the tone for the rest of the night. The English team had an excellent tournament. They played some good football to reach the finals, but Sunday was not their day. They lost 3-2 on penalties. Instead of accepting this result, the fans lashed out. They were violent and racist. These pictures should give you an idea. The English fans threw punches at Italian supporters. They flung them to the ground and kicked them. Even the Italian flag was stomped on.
Oh, look.
these images can be disturbing, and we advise discretion, viewer discretion. Outside Wembley, this was the scene: vandalism and vigilantism. You can't call these people fans. They're rioters. They attacked people and damaged public property. Even their own players were not spared. 3 English players missed their penalty. All 3 of them were players of colour. It's a matter of pure coincidence, but not for English fans. They piled on the abuse and hate, compared those players to monkeys, and called for an all-white team. Well, at least the facade is off. England fans aren't just hurt by the loss, they're hurt by their own country's diversity. For them, the players, referees, fans, everyone must be white. In Manchester, a mural of English star Marcus Rashford was defaced. Such treatment is reserved for players of colour. Does Britain admit it is racist? No, it doesn't. It says this behaviour is limited to a tiny minority. It's hard to believe because England fans create trouble wherever they go. In the 2018 World Cup in Russia, they were fighting on the streets. In fact, no World Cup is complete without some hooliganism by the British. They have a name for it too. It's called the English disease, a series of toxic and aggressive fan culture. Let me show you some numbers. When the English national team plays, domestic violence surges 26%. If they lose, it rises to 38%. This is a problem in all sports, in all countries, we're told, but England is much worse. Here's an example. England were playing Germany in the knockouts. They pulled away at a 2-0 lead. The camera fixed on a 9-year-old German fan. She was inconsolable. But look at how English supporters reacted. This is what a British YouTuber wrote, and I'm quoting, "Never in my life have I been prouder to be English than when I heard a pub full of people erupt into cheers after seeing a 10-year-old German girl crying in the crowd." That should sum up the average English fan. The British government is distancing itself from all of them. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has condemned the hooliganism and racism, but words are not enough. These so-called fans have no place at stadiums. They must be banned, at least temporarily, which brings us to another question. Should there be any fans at football matches? And here's why we ask. Wuhan virus cases in the UK have quadrupled. The Delta variant is driving a new wave of infection. The cases have been on the rise for weeks now, but at Wembley there were no masks, no social distancing. Look at the crowds. More than 60,000 fans were packed into the stadium. Hundreds more probably thronged bars and pubs. A World Health Organization official summed it up perfectly. Am I supposed to be enjoying watching transmission happening in front of my eyes? That's exactly what the Euros were. A Superspreader event sanctioned and celebrated by the government. For Britain, it was a declaration of victory. The maskless fans were proof of Britain's pandemic success. But they may have celebrated too soon because in the end, the trophy did not come home, but the Wuhan virus certainly may have. And talking about setbacks, Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli has suffered one too, a big one rather. He has lost his job. Nepal's Supreme Court asked the country's president to appoint Sher Bahadur Deuba as the next Prime Minister. The decision finally ends the long-running political crisis of Nepal, one that was triggered by KP Sharma Oli himself. So what does this decision mean for him and for the political future of his country? Here's a report.
In the last 7 months, Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli has tried everything. Dissolving the parliament, cobbling up a majority, forcing a fresh. None of it worked. His desperation has resulted in this, the loss of power. The setback comes from Nepal's Supreme Court. It has ruled against KP Sharma Oli. The case began in the month of May, but the problem was older. Oli's party was split. His position as PM was untenable, so he wanted Parliament to be dissolved. He tried it not once, but twice. In the month of May, his move was challenged in the Supreme Court. Now, the verdict has come. The Parliament won't be dissolved. The court has reinstated it. The judges have effectively asked Oli to step down. They've said Sheikh Bahadur Deuba should be appointed as the Prime Minister. The President has time till Tuesday evening to announce the appointment. The decision was met with some protests in Kathmandu. Meanwhile, the task is cut out for Deuba. He's a long-term rival of Oli. He will now have to prove majority in Parliament. Earlier, Deuba had claimed support from 149 lawmakers. A comfortable majority in the 275-member Parliament. Deuba will be given 30 days to prove he has the numbers. If he wins the trust vote, it will end months of political uncertainty in Nepal. Something that had handicapped the country during the pandemic. In recent weeks, Nepal has battled a deadly Wuhan virus surge. At the peak of the second wave, the country was reporting a positivity rate of 47%. The high number of infections had forced Oli to appeal for international help. But it wasn't the pandemic that took Oli's job. KP Sharma Oli's third stint as Prime Minister was riddled with controversies. His downfall began last year, when Oli refused to honour a previous deal to share the Prime Ministership with Pushpa Kumar Dahal, the co-chairman of the Nepal Communist Party. This led to a split in the ruling party. Oli's clear leanings towards China only made the situation worse. As Prime Minister, he pushed for more Chinese investment in connectivity projects. When the Chinese encroached upon 7 districts of Nepal, Oli dismissed the threat. Plus, he stoked one controversy after another with India, a key neighbour and ally of Nepal. It began with the release of a new political map, when Nepal staked claim over 3 disputed territories, Lipulekh, Kalapani and Limpiadhura. Next, Oli blamed India for the pandemic and then claimed that Lord Ram was born in Nepal and not India. Last month, he even claimed ownership of yoga. These claims have not only angered Indians but also the opposition leaders of Nepal. In recent weeks, Oli has only repeated his past mistakes, allowing the opposition to unite and ensure his ouster. The Supreme Court's order drove the final nail in the coffin. Oli's turbulent prime ministership is coming to an end. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
South Africa is witnessing riots. Residential buildings are being set ablaze, shopping malls are being looted, highways are blocked, and armed protesters are marching on the streets. The situation is volatile. The unrest, the worst in many years. At least 6 people have died, dozens have been injured, more than 200 have been put behind bars, and reports indicate that these figures are only set to worsen. So what is going on? I'll start with the beginning. The reason behind the unrest, what caused it? The conviction of Jacob Zuma, the former president of South Africa. On the 29th of June, Zuma was sentenced to 15 months in prison. What for? Because he defied an inquiry into corruption allegations during his tenure as president. So South Africa's constitutional court, which is the most powerful court in the country, declared Zuma guilty and sent him to jail on charges of contempt. With this conviction, Zuma became the first South African president to go to jail. The sentence was hailed as a victory for the rule of law in the country, but it ended up turning law and order upside down. Let me show you some images. These are Zuma supporters, armed with sticks and shields, protesting against the court order. They've taken to the streets of almost every major city in South Africa, looting, ransacking and burning everything on their way. On Saturday, they blocked one of South Africa's biggest highways by setting fire to several trucks and vehicles. The highway burned the entire night, leaving thousands stranded for several hours. The highway is located in the KwaZulu-Natal province, which happens to be Jacob Zuma's stronghold. Several cities in this province have now been gripped by unrest, like Durban, the third most populous city in South Africa. It's witnessing unprecedented violence. Zuma supporters are burning tires, they're looting stores and clashing with the police. At least 37 people have been arrested. Same story in Johannesburg, South Africa's economic hub. Protesters are looting shops and ransacking stores. There are also reports of shots being fired at passing vehicles. At least 62 people have been detained and put behind bars. Our correspondent Calden Ongmu has been reporting from Johannesburg. She sends us this report.
This is what has been left from violent protests that took place throughout the weekend and at night, even after President Ramaphosa sent out strong message to those involved in this. Police continued to make arrests even at night as protesters continued looting businesses, vandalizing properties and burning tires and blocking roads. This morning, many commuters have been left stranded as most public transport have suspended their businesses, fearing being attacked. Throughout the night, police and protesters kept playing cat and mice as some protesters were feared carrying firearms that went off time and again. The protest that first started in KwaZulu-Natal province by former President Jacob Zuma's supporters slowly spread to Gauteng.
Now, as someone famously said, when the looting begins, the shooting begins. In view of this escalating violence, the police has been forced to fire shots to disperse protesters. Reports say this has led to the death of at least 6 people. But whether they died in police shootings is yet to be confirmed. The authorities are not taking any chances. They've asked the South African military now to quell the violence. The army has been deployed in at least 2 provinces. This is in order to help police cope with looting and arson attacks on businesses. But even the army may find it tough to contain the violence because we are not talking about 2 or 3 cities. The unrest has spilled over to several places. Umlazi, Katlehong, Pietermaritzburg, Chesterville, and some other cities that have been witnessing violence in South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa has issued a statement telling the protesters that it's okay to be hurt and angry, but nothing justifies the destructive actions that are endangering lives and damaging the country's economy.
These acts are endangering the lives of people and damaging our efforts to rebuild the economy. While there are those who may be hurt and angry at this moment, there can never be any justification whatsoever for anybody to embark on violent and disruptive actions that negatively affect the rights of others.
The president has appealed for calm, but Jacob Zuma's family says this is just the beginning. Edward Zuma, who is the former president's older son, says the situation will get worse if his father is not released. A statement he made a few days back is going viral, where Zuma Jr. has threatened authorities that they will have to kill him before they lay their hands on his father.
They can give Zuma 15 months, they can give Zuma 24 months, or they can give Zuma 100 months. He's not going to even serve 1 day or one minute of that. They would have to kill me before they put their hands on him. They are not going to lay their hands on Zuma over my dead body.
Extremely irresponsible statement, to say the least. It's a developing story that we'll be tracking. Meanwhile, this is what's happening in Cuba. The allure of Cuban communism appears to be waning. The country is facing its worst economic crisis in 30 years, and the government does not have answers. Thousands of anti-government protesters are marching through major cities. These are the biggest demonstrations in decades, but with no Castro at the helm. How will Cuba navigate this crisis? Will the legend of Fidel be enough to quell the protests? Or is this the beginning of something bigger? Our next report tells you.
Communists love revolutions. They plot it, romanticize it, embrace it, until it reaches their doorstep. Cuba knows a thing or two about revolutions. This is a country forged by fiery communists. a band of rugged guerrilla fighters led by the charismatic Fidel Castro. But modern-day Cuba is not a communist fiefdom, and these protesters are here to say just that.
We are here because of the repression against the people. They are starving us to death. Havana is collapsing. We have no house, we have nothing, but they have money to build hotels and they have us starving.
Anti-government protests are rare in Cuba, but the Wuhan virus pandemic created the perfect storm. Critical medicines are in short supply. Food and electricity are becoming a luxury. And the government's response has been to blackout complaints. For President Miguel Diaz-Canel, this is a big test. He took charge in 2018 as Cuba's first non-Castro leader. Now he faces the worst economic crisis in 30 years. The Castros may be gone, but Diaz's strategy is straight out of the Castro playbook. Blame the Americans.
We are not going to admit that any counter-revolutionary mercenary sold out to the government of the United States, sold out to the empire, receiving money from the agencies, allowing themselves to be carried away by all these strategies of ideological subversion to provoke destabilization in our country. There will be a revolutionary response.
Meddling in Central America is an old Washington habit. But these protests are not choreographed. They broke out spontaneously, engulfing major Cuban cities. These people are not chanting Cuba Libre. They are singing "Down with Dictatorship" and "We Want Liberty." Soon the police arrived. They shut down the internet and pushed back against the protesters. Some of them were arrested. A few also sustained injuries.
State security beat me and my daughter, a minor. They beat us because we were walking down the street.
The United States is keeping a close eye on these protests. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan condemned the targeting of protesters. He offered American support to freedom of assembly in Cuba, a right limited to communist gatherings. Things are unlikely to get better soon. Wuhan virus cases are rising in Cuba, but the country is yet to import a single vaccine. They are depending on homegrown jabs with dubious efficacy data. Combined with crippling American sanctions, Cuba is boxed in. The people are tired after 6 decades of communist authoritarianism. They want food and freedom, not Fidel. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The sky is no longer the limit. It's July 2021 and the world has entered a new era of space tourism. Virgin Galactic founder, 70-year-old Richard Branson, has completed the world's first space tourism flight. 7 crew members went on a joyride to space. They saw the world from above, experienced zero gravity, floated around in a space plane and returned to Earth within an hour of taking off. The historic flight has inaugurated the age of space tourism. The first commercial flight is scheduled to take off next year. If you're wondering when you can book your joyride to space, watch this.
To the next generation of dreamers, if we can do this, just imagine what you can do.
This is Richard Branson's Neil Armstrong moment.
Someday they'll experience it. It's a complete experience for life.
In 1969, Armstrong became the first human to land on the moon. Some 52 years later, Virgin Galactic founder Richard Branson made history by completing the world's first space tourism flight.
To all you kids down there, I was once a child with a dream, looking up to the stars. Now I'm an adult in a spaceship with lots of other wonderful adults looking down to our beautiful, beautiful Earth.
The date is the 12th of July, 2021. And here's what happened over the last 24 hours. spaceflight company Virgin Galactic tested its first fully crewed flight. The spaceplane took off from the U.S. town of Truth or Consequences in New Mexico. It reached the blackness of space, touched an altitude of 86 kilometers, where Branson and team experienced a few minutes of microgravity. The plane then descended back to Earth, touched down on the same runway it had taken off from. The entire flight lasted about an hour, and Branson came back visibly awestruck.
I'm still in space. I'll do my best. As you go into space, views are breathtaking.
Welcome to the new era of space tourism. At least 3 companies are offering you a trip to space. Planned flights begin next year. That's when Virgin Galactic will begin commercial operations. At least 600 tickets have already been reserved, each for $250,000, or 1.8 crore rupees. 8 days from now, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos, too, will blast off for space. His ride will be the New Shepard spaceship, a rocket owned by Bezos' space tourism company, Blue Origin. The New Shepard will cross the Kármán line, blast off and land vertically. If there's space, there's Elon Musk. The SpaceX test flight is scheduled for September 2021. In the pipeline is also a trip to the moon. In 2023, SpaceX aims to fly Japanese billionaire Yusaku Maezawa and 7 others around the moon. Just so that we are clear, this is not the first time tourists are going to space. Between 2001 and 2009, 7 space tourists availed rides to the International Space Station. This was on board the Russian Soyuz spacecraft. What's changed is the fact that space tourism today is no longer a hitchhike. Rockets and spacecrafts have been designed especially for tourists. Recliner chair and larger-than-life window. Everything you need to breathe in the spectacular view of the Earth and have an experience of your lifetime. So how much money are we talking about? Full disclosure, space travel is not going to be cheap. A Blue Origin ticket is expected to be priced at $200,000 or 1.4 crore rupees. It's 1.8 crore rupees for Virgin Galactic. Here's one thing we can tell you for sure. Space tourism will become comparatively cheaper over the years. Virgin Galactic, for example, hopes to eventually reduce tickets to $40,000, which is around 29 lakh rupees. Investment bank UBS estimates the space tourism industry will be valued at $3 billion by 2030. It's 2021 that will go down in space history books as the year when space tourism became a reality. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Afghanistan lost to the theocracy, decency to entitlement in the UK. Cuba loses peace to fiery communism. Lost in the stories of politics and policies, the battle against climate change, one that we are losing, all of us. Let me show you how. This is British Columbia. Stacked on its beaches are baked and burnt oysters. They've all been cooked by the extreme heat wave in Canada. At least 1 billion marine animals have died in the country since late June. 1 billion. The beaches are dry, the seaweed is charred, and so are the animals.
These guys are just dead.
Like this one here is freshly dead.
Because it's opened up?
This used to be alive?
Yeah.
Now there's nothing.
The temperature in Canada touched 40 degrees Celsius between the 26th and 28th of June. Oyster pickers and owners of oyster farms had expected the heat wave to affect marine life, but no one had predicted a situation this bad. Clams, sea stars, mussels, seaweed, all are gone. Canada's beaches are stinking of dead animal. No one knows how big the effect on the environment will be.
Mussels, most of the mussels around here now are all gone. My clams, you can see the sand dollars and stuff, are all dead.
Across the border in the United States, the temperature has hit an all-time high. In California's Palm Springs, it's 45 degrees Celsius. It's so hot that popsicles are melting within seconds. Watch this. California's Death Valley recorded 54 degrees Celsius, a dangerous high for all those living around it. Authorities have sent out a health warning for small children and the elderly. In suburban Los Angeles, not very far from Hollywood, goats are being used to clear off a patch of land.
Hey, girls! Yeah. Right.
Here's what they're doing. These animals are creating a buffer between the forest and the village. Do you know why? So that in case of a forest fire, the blaze does not spread to the habitated land. This is being called a defensible space. Basically, we humans are deploying goats to defend ourselves from a disaster of our making. These heat waves that Canada and the United States are battling are not normal. They're a result of climate change, a climate change that we are responsible for. It's the result of excessive use of fossil fuels, the likes of coal, oil and gas. The heat wave is the result of deforestation, cutting down of trees to meet human greed, of increased intensive agriculture, encroaching on forest land to feed ourselves. You see, British Columbia is known for its cool and crisp water. This region is supposed to be ideal for growing shellfish. These, by the way, are really tough creatures. Shellfish can endure high temperatures. When it's too hot, shellfish hold water inside their shells and close up. But the prolonged heat wave brought about by human activity has taken a toll on their endurance. Their deaths have taken a toll on those who depend on the sale of shellfish to run their homes. British Columbia alone produces nearly 10,000 tons of shellfish annually. They contributed $27 million to the province's revenue. Oysters accounted for 56% of this amount. These numbers are from 2019, which also happens to be the year when Canada's greenhouse emission increased by 0.2%. The country released 730 tons, megatons of carbon dioxide into the environment. And this is despite Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. You see, nature does not understand politics and policy. In fact, it looks through smoke screens aimed at hiding inaction, like the one put up by the United States. For a long time now, the US has been playing passing the parcel when it comes to climate change, conveniently forgetting that it is America, one of the world's highest emitters of greenhouse gases, releasing an equivalent of 6,558 million metric tons of CO2 in 2019. This is according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Washington may be able to shrug responsibility at global forums, but how will it protect its own people at home from climate change? At least 200 people died in Oregon and Washington in late June. 200. 791 in British Columbia. These are human beings. Climate change is a global battle. And getting goats to eat off the vegetation will help no one in the long term. Making amends will. Reducing the number of cars on the roads will. This time last year, the world was in a lockdown. Cars were off the road, pollutants away from cities. Now cars are back, so are the emissions and pollution, and all of this is trapping the heat in our cities. What's happening in Canada and the US is unprecedented. Experts are warning of more such events in the near future, at a rate more frequent. This is climate change. This is our planet calling out for help. The signs are there. The message is loud and clear. What exactly are we waiting for? Think about it. We'll wrap the show, leaving you as always with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.